Thank you for joining us this afternoon, where we're going to be talking about how we create more diverse and inclusive marketing teams. My name is Victoria Lennon. I am a committee member on the London Committee for PM Forum, and I'm also Head of Digital Marketing at BDO. I think, as we all know, recent events have put diversity and inclusion very firmly on leadership agendas. And today we're going to look at how we as professional services marketers can actually change our everyday practices, give people a voice, and also look at what's some of the best practice that we can start developing in our industry. I'm delighted to introduce our panelists today to discuss this. So one of our panelists unfortunately had to drop out, Sarb Samra, but I'm delighted to say that Bukky Fatusin, who is Senior BD Manager for Africa Group at Orrick, has very kindly stepped in at the last minute, so thank you so much for doing this, Bukky. Bukky has extensive experience in practice group, key account management, sector, and in Africa-focused roles. We're also joined by Taja Beckford-Daley, who is BD exec at Gowling, and Tunji Akintokun, who is Director and Head of Sales at PwC. Taja provides BD support for Gowling's government and private sector clients, as well as being co-chair of Gowling's multicultural network, Embrace. Tunji is a multi-award winning leader in technology and business, as well as a passionate advocate for diversity in STEM, social mobility and inclusion in the workplace. So thank you, all three of you, for joining us today. Now, if you've got any questions, and we do welcome your questions, please use the Q&A box to submit those. We'll definitely be going through them at the end. If you've got any technical difficulties, please just let us know in the chat, and then one of our team will have a look at that for you. So, within the invitation, we had a link to a questionnaire to look at the diversity of our membership. So if you completed that, thank you very, very much. We're going to take a look at some of the results from that to start with before we start talking to our panelists. So of the people who responded to the survey, 3/4 were female and the quarter were male. The breakdown that we saw was predominantly white, with 9% identifying as Asian British, 6% as Black, African, Caribbean, Black British, 6% as mixed multiple ethnic groups, and 1% identifying as something other or different. 19% were school leavers, and over 80% of graduates, and of those graduates, over 50% were the first generation to go to university. Around 25% of those surveyed had suffered from racially motivated microaggressions, or had thought they had but found it was hard to tell. These examples ranged from, despite being the most experienced in the matter, actually not being trusted until a white person had validated it, laughing or mocking at accents and pronunciations, assumptions that are made based on your name, such as what religion you are, what you eat, the type of music you listen to, and also some people finding that they were being excluded from professional and social circles as well. The final question we asked was around if people had called out racist behaviours and attitudes of colleagues, and we had quite a number of responses to this, and the reactions ranged quite variably. Some did appreciate that it was called out and apologised. Others did not take it well. They were in denial or quite oblivious to what they'd said. Some people actually experienced further isolation. Some people made a joke. And a very common answer was it being met with surprise, confusion and awkwardness. With one person saying, with awkward confusion, people often make comments as jokes and don't intend any negativity and are therefore surprised and confused when addressed as it being an issue. So just looking at this particular point around those awkward conversations that people might be having, my first question to our panelists, Bukky, I'm going to start with you, is have you actually seen any good examples of companies actually helping employees have these awkward conversations that are actually being positive and being productive?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, and thanks for having me today. I guess one of the main sort of examples that I've seen is these conversations, they're tough, they're chewy, they're not, how's the weather or how do you like your cup of tea? They are awkward conversations. And one thing that the chairman at Orrick has been keen to try and do is really just to keep having those conversations, to move them away from the awkwardness and to help them become the norm, to help them become the day-to-day chitter-chatter that we should be having. It only becomes awkward, or it only sounds awkward, because we don't talk enough about these things. This is coming from sort of the top down. So it's not just about myself and my colleagues, my direct colleagues having this conversation. It's really about from partner level. Every person along the organizational chain should be able to be encouraged to have this conversation and to not see it as awkward, because it's the awkward element that makes it difficult to address, that makes it, chewy. But it shouldn't have to be like that if we just continue to have those conversations. We have chairman's conversations. He's always open to talk to anybody. We have a Black Lawyers of Orrick organization as well. And they all encourage these conversations to happen. So we move away from the awkwardness, because I think you don't know what you don't know. And the only way you're going to get to know if something you've always thought or the way you've always felt makes someone else uncomfortable, makes them feel awkward, is to talk about it. And it's a conversation that we've never really had to have before, because it's taken a seismic social injustice to get all of us to sit around like this and have these types of conversations. And what I guess I'm hoping in the future is these become less awkward, because they become the norm. We start to see things that we need to change and things that we need to alter. And it starts becoming, less awkward. It starts becoming more conversational, and it's a board level conversation as well as a, chitter chatter over coffee. So people have really become a lot more comfortable about it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, you mentioned there what sounds like the most senior person in the company making this a priority. Are we starting to actually see that shift, that it is absolutely becoming a priority and no longer a sort of box-ticking exercise as perhaps it has been in the past?
I think only time will tell. What I'm always conscious of is performative allyship. When we experience something as we've just experienced over the summer, organizations set up working groups and all sorts of different offshoots to talk about these things, and let's sit together and do an initiative and do this and do that. And I think sometimes people do get initiative fatigue. It becomes a bit too much for people, and because you're constantly revisiting some of the diversity and inclusion issues that you face on a day-to-day, so having to talk about it a lot can be chewy. But I think fundamentally the key is really to ensure that these conversations continue to happen, and these conversations don't just fall, by the wayside. In 3 to 6 months' time, we'll see where these initiatives go. That's really the point where we're going to be like, is this an embedded change of culture in this firm or this organization, or was this just a mere talking point, a box-ticking exercise, a black screen, just a nice to have because we had to do it at that point in time? Time will tell.
Yeah. Taja, have you seen any positive examples of how we can have these conversations?
Yeah, within Gowling itself, we have the Embrace Network, and although it has taken kind of quite a while to kind of create an action plan, when things happened overseas and that the society injustice kind of came to light, we started having conversations about what we could be doing here and in the firm to kind of create these open conversations. And I have seen, quite a change in, people coming forward and especially we've got like a social media workplace site. And we've had people, come forward and being really interested in getting involved and becoming like an ally and discussing these things. So when it comes to conversations like that, I think Bukky is right that, time will tell. This could just be like a thing for a temporary measure. Or if you carry on these conversations and make it less awkward, then it could be something that, you know, is embedded into firms. In terms of positivity, I think we do have a long way to go, because I'm still seeing that, you know, even people describing someone, they hesitate to say they're black, and that shouldn't be something that we hesitate to say, because we are black and there's nothing wrong with that. So I think there is a long way, but it's slow and steady steps.
Tunji, what are you starting to see this change happen as well?
Yeah, I am actually, Victoria, and I think and good afternoon to everyone. I think going back to Bukky's point, you've got to create an environment to have the conversation, because it is awkward. And I think when we look at all the different strands of diversity, often ethnicity is the one that people are less or the least comfortable in having that dialogue with. So first and foremost, with most companies, I am seeing more appetite from companies to create that environment so we can start the dialogue, because until you get to a point of making people comfortable to even start, then you really don't start from a very solid place. And I think, you know, if I look at our own firm at PwC, we probably did something similar to you did, Bukky, in that we started at the top, and this was probably something personal for me because I was involved. We chose to have that uncomfortable conversation to 22,000 of our employees on the live stream, and I think actually on the day it was actually broadcast, it was probably about 11,000, but we know pretty much everyone within the firm watched it afterwards, and that was with myself, but also with two black partners within the firm, to really level set people around what the challenge is around this, not just what had happened, the awful events in the US with George Floyd, but then how does that translate to the UK, and more importantly, how does that translate into the workplace, and why people are seeing, you know, the action that's being taken externally. And what that did, I think, was it gave everybody in the firm a good understanding as to where we were coming from in respects to some of the challenges that were faced societally, but then how that then translated into the workforce. And I think to build on a lot of the work that many organisations are doing around diversity and inclusion, and we had a 5-point action plan like many organisations do, which was around how we attract, retain, and develop our talent, both from an ethnic minority perspective, but also from other strands. We used the live stream to then also reinforce with a further 5 specific actions that were to then really look at how we address that specifically for our black colleagues. And I think that's the sort of action you've got to be able to see. And I totally agree with Bukky and Taja, time will tell, but I'm a great believer in what gets measured gets done. So if you put tangible measurements around the actions that you're taking, then there's probably an opportunity for people to be held accountable to ensure that those things actually happen.
Yeah, we've actually had a great question on the Q&A around that accountability. With someone asking, I've heard several times that diversity is a priority for management. However, I found that there is no accountability. In your experience, have you seen examples of where management are held accountable, like they would be held accountable if they missed revenue targets?
I think I have seen that with many organisations. I think there's 2 steps here, Victoria. I think it's making sure organisations understand what the business imperative is to have inclusion and diversity, either on their boards or through their organisations. And I think that luckily over the last few years, there's been more empirical data that suggests by industry what the impact is of not having that. Now, for some organisations, they may have a strap line that says they're going to do something, but it doesn't really make a difference. But what we do see, and certainly I've seen working with many organisations, there's almost there's a journey that they will go on in terms of getting there, which is from the culture of the organisations, the acknowledgement that there is an issue in the first place, because that often isn't always seen. But then there's also then the benchmarking. What does good look like? What are you going to hold yourself accountable to? So it's very easy to be able to say we're going to put these targets in, but then looking at data, looking at what best practice looks like, what I've seen has been a very good way to hold companies accountable is to use some of the standards out there. The National Equality Standard is one which I think holds people accountable. What I like about this particular standard is that you have to do a lot of work to be able to attain it. But then, once you've got it, you're then you're re-investigated every couple of years to ensure that you're holding that standard. So it's not a shiny badge that you get once and you can publicise and say that we're great. You've got to then maintain that, which then holds management and boards accountable for continuing that work going forward.
Yeah. It's interesting that because we work at an industry which is often very much about standards and being assessed. So it strikes me as actually that would actually be a very, very good thing, and actually should it be part of those ISO type standards, to really drive that accountability home. Taja, Bukky, I'm not sure if you've seen any examples of senior management being held to account or management being held to account.
I'd say unfortunately I haven't. I have seen an example of, so for example, in Embrace we have someone from the board who facilitates, and he acts as like the link between the higher people in the firm and professional services and the legal team, which is good. It's good to have his support. But in terms of accountability and really kind of like, if things go belly up, who's going to be held accountable for this if we don't meet targets, who's going to be held accountable? I haven't seen that, unfortunately, but hopefully, because things are moving forward, and these things, diversity and inclusion is kind of something that should be and is slowly being taken more seriously. Hopefully there'll be standards in place that someone has to take accountability for.
Are there any particular firms that you think are doing it well? One of the ones which I hear people talk about, I think, is White & Case. I've been particularly strong on that. Are there any other firms that you've seen that actually have been doing a good job on it?
I'm not aware of other firms. I can sort of only speak for the firms that I've worked in. And in all honesty, I agree with what Tunji said in terms of, for you to start having accountability, you need to actually go a few steps backward and look at the culture. And the culture is built with people, and the people come with their intrinsic biases to work. And until and unless you sort of deal with that, you can't hold people to account or sanction them or hold them to a standard that they don't know that they're not meeting, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
So you kind of need to start with the individual and ensure that they know that the way they've been operating for years probably isn't the way we should be operating now. So there needs to be a cultural shift before we even talk about, sort of benchmarking or having people being held to account. Unfortunately, currently what we are seeing is, if we're pitching for an infrastructure project in, say, Senegal, and we're part of a consortium, they are actively asking us, how diverse is the team you're putting forward? And that's what's driving the change. Really, it should be the other way around. We should be diverse just by virtue of being a firm that has, great, assets and great people that are working there. But because it's the demand from our clients, we're now sort of moving, and I know a number of firms are doing the same thing. They're working to make sure that the stats that we put forward, the team that we put forward, are culturally diverse, that there's no gender biases, and we're putting forward the most diverse team that we can. But it really should work the other way around. We should be diverse anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to take a lot before we get to the stage of sort of benchmarking and accountability, in my opinion.
Yeah, I've heard of that before, that it's the clients demanding that we are more diverse, and I think to turn that around in ourselves, that we as hiring managers should also be demanding, I think, of our HR teams, of our recruitment teams, the need for diverse amounts of candidates. And I certainly think there's a lot that we can do to make that happen. So I think just on that kind of recruitment angle, I'd just love to find out a little bit more about your own careers, and are there any particular challenges that you have faced, I guess from a from a racial and white privilege point of view in your careers that have actually either blocked you, and has it actually changed? Have you seen that change in the time that you've been in professional services as well, or is this still an issue?
Well, first of all, I guess my journey into professional services is it's quite funny actually. It's probably full circle. I think when I actually trained and come from a technology background, so pretty much my entire career has been in designing microelectronics equipment, processors. I did that for many years, but I started out after I graduated from university working in professional services. The irony of it is I'm working back at the firm now that I started with, but luckily when I started there, I only lasted 4 weeks last time. I didn't like it. So I left professional services for a very long time and went and pursued a career in tech. But that took me from being a pure technologist much more into the business. And then from the business, I've moved over then into sales and business development over the last probably decade or more. And that's how it's led me back to professional services, as we as an industry, certainly as PwC, we're looking to, I guess, provide more of that commerciality around our approach to our clients with just bids, but also in terms of, looking for business. So that's kind of part of my role now, as being back with the firm after quite a long time. In terms of whether I've been held back, I recognise where my peers have certainly accelerated a lot faster than I have. And I wouldn't say that I could call that out as racism, but certainly when I knew I was outperforming peers and I wasn't given those opportunities, I'd always seek feedback, and it was patchy at best or none at worst. So there were never any real concrete reasons given as to why I didn't get the positions, and that was consistent through quite a lot of my career. So I probably got to where I wanted to in the end, but probably a lot slower than some of my counterparts. And I think over the years, what I have recognised and seen that being is probably more down to cultural awareness and understanding more about the individual rather than it is around race itself. And I think for me, unconscious bias or race awareness, as we call it these days, is probably more important than ever in the workplace to progress. Because I think if your cultural background and how you are isn't understood by people that don't have that learned experience or have experienced it themselves in the background that they've grown up with, then the structure, the apparatus of most firms don't account for that to allow people to progress. So that's certainly what I've recognised and seen through my career. Has it got better? Yes. Is there still a lot to do? Absolutely. And I think that for many organisations, the systemic processes by which they promote people and and I have to say for our industry, and I'll keep it to probably the big four because it is public knowledge. I think that if you look at the number of partners that there are amongst the big four, which is probably circa 3,000, it's quite embarrassing to say that there are only around 12 partners in total out of that 3,000 that are black. So that's probably not a good statistic between the big four that we're proud of, and we need to improve that. But the route to partnership, whether it's in a law firm or a professional services firm like ours, is not one where you just kind of slot in. You've got to probably go through the organisation and the structure to be able to get there. And if that structure is not built to be able to account for diversity, inclusion, or cultural differences, then the chances of success are minimised. And I think what we're seeing now are firms starting to change the criteria and looking at, to Bukky's point around the clients that we serve and what that needs to look like in terms of, ensuring that we do have a diverse set of candidates, diverse partners, diverse directors within the firm to be able to reflect the clients that we serve. And I think that firms are starting to move that needle because, funny enough, it becomes a business imperative. Going back to the previous point, it starts to impact business. And when it starts to impact business, firms tend to take more notice and they tend to then start to look at how they need to move the needle and make a difference to that. So one way or the other, we will see change. And I think over time, hopefully, you know, that will be something that is the norm, and we don't have to call it out or have programs to progress more diversity and inclusion in firms. But it certainly feels to me personally, it's starting to move in the right direction, but probably not fast enough.
Mm-hmm. Taja, what lured you into professional services, and what have your experiences been so far?
Yeah, so this is like kind of the start of my career. So I graduated in 2017, and it was pure luck that I ended up in a bids job. I didn't know what bidding was. I didn't know what procurement was. I kind of was offered the job and I took it. My first job placement wasn't the greatest. I was the only black person on the first floor and in my team. So there was a lot of kind of like imposter syndrome. That's a very real thing kind of going on. And the microaggressions I experienced there weren't, you know, it wasn't a great first start to my career. So I did move. And then I managed to get into business development by luck. There was a job going in bids and I didn't get that, but they offered me a job as a BD exec for government. So I took that. So I have to say there has been improvement from when I first started in my career, but I shouldn't have had to go through experiences that I did to be at a place where things are better, but I'm still seeing that things aren't great, especially when you look at the wider firm and, you know, there's not one black partner type of thing when you look at the wider issue, because it goes beyond me and it goes above me. So there's things to change there as well.
Okay. And Bukky, what about how did professional services lure you into it, and what's been your path in this industry?
My path has been quite a strange one. I actually studied law at the LSE, and I went to law school and promptly decided I really didn't want to be a lawyer. But I did enjoy, and I very quickly became aware of the whole BD and marketing function for law firms. So I landed a job initially at Linklaters, and I have since then worked in several BD and client relationship management roles, and sort of worked in different sectors, and now more heavily focused on Africa as a region. And I would say the biggest challenge that I have faced is not seeing any representation above me. I was, you know, a senior exec. There was no heads off that were black or minority ethnic. There was no senior managers. There was no one that looked like me in those roles. So it made it difficult for me to think that I could aspire to be able to be in that role one day, because there simply wasn't anyone that looked like me. So in essence, as my career has sort of gone on, I've had to, in a way, engineer certain roles for myself, you know, and build roles out of my capabilities, because it's what you hear some people say, if, you know, there's no table, you build a table and you sit at the table because there isn't one available. And that's essentially what I've had to do for some of my career, is look at my skill set and think to myself, okay, you know, this role doesn't exist, but here's my expertise, here's what I know I can do. Because I'm so keen and I'm so like seriously passionate about having people behind me, seeing myself and others and knowing that that's attainable. So I don't want people to come to interview and be interviewed by two white people, and everyone they meet on their experience and their journey through that interview are all white people. I need them to see that representation exists so they can aspire to it. Like, you don't know where you could get to if you've never seen anyone like you do it. And that's one of the major challenges that I've had to face. I've just kind of flipped it on its head and thought to myself, you know, representation isn't there, so you kind of have to create your own representation in essence.
Yeah. I mean, I think that point about actually being interviewed by a diverse group of people, I think that's really important as well, because we know that there's inherent bias in sort of hiring what is similar to you, or perhaps a reflection of yourself, and that as hiring managers, we should actually be challenging ourselves to make our interviewing panels more diverse, to get those to get those other voices in there, as well as to obviously show the representation too. Tunji, Taja, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about that in the recruitment process.
Yeah, I do, and I'd agree with that, and I think certainly within our firm, that's something that we do in terms of the panels for any of our promotions do need to be diverse, and I think the the attraction part in terms of attracting clients. We know that our funnel is fairly broad in terms of the amount of diverse talent we attract to the firm, and we've got processes in place to ensure that that attraction that we get is translated into opportunities for people to join the firm, because we know from, you know, previously with most firms, that's where it kind of goes down. People want to work for these firms, but then the funnel narrows very quickly. So, you know, I know that, you know, we've put a lot of effort into ensuring that, you know, that we've got the right diverse set of panels, but probably more importantly, also looking at how you recruit, because for me, that's probably one of the most important parts, because often, and I've spoken to firms in the past where they've struggled because they say, well, we can't find the talent. And I said, well, you're not looking hard enough for it. And then people say, well, where do you go? And then you say, well, here's 4 or 5 organizations that deal with diverse talent, whether you want junior talent right the way up to CX level. So, and in most cases, genuinely, they have no idea that these firms exist. And again, that's another challenge in its own right within that industry around being able to do that. So I think, you know, signposting and being able to ensure that, you know, you've got good mechanisms. And I always talk about this a lot because I think it's so important. The system and the structure and the apparatus of firms is probably the part that always lets people down. And being able to ensure that in each part of that process, you've got the right mechanisms or the control mechanisms to ensure that you've got, you know, the right levels of diversity on panels, and they're more balanced, the way in which you attract in terms of CVs, you know, how you look at those types of processes. I think they're really important to ensure that, you know, no matter whether it's an ethnicity background, whether it's a social mobility background, that you're getting the best talent with the best attitude and aptitude for the role, rather than, you know, the university that you went to, whether it be Russell Group or non-Russell Group, or whether it's Oxbridge or not Oxbridge. You know, you try and level the playing field at all the levels to ensure that you're looking at the ability of the candidate, irrespective of their background. And I think that's something that firms have to work harder on to ensure, is that not just at the inclusion level when they join the firm, which is typically entry, but at all levels, whether that's promotion from within or whether that's externally.
Yeah. I've had a really interesting question in the Q&A, which is, in your experience, how involved are HR in monitoring diversity of hires / recruitment? For example, I understand that one Big Four, brackets not PwC, keep an unofficial log of partners who tend to veto BAME candidates. So HR therefore don't ask those partners to interview BAME candidates. I mean, does anyone's firm actually monitor the diversity of the hires and of the recruitment? I mean, I mean, in my company we do an ethnicity survey, but I don't know if it's necessarily monitored at an HR level myself.
Well, we do have the data where it's declared. Obviously, from a GDPR perspective, we, you know, you can record those stats within your HR systems, and we try and encourage that so that we are being fair, and also are able to look at areas where we may not be meeting our standards or expectations around our own targets. So the data itself is certainly held by HR. It's obviously kept very confidentially at that level, so we can give aggregate data of, you know, within the firm in terms of how many Black employees we've got, how many Asian employees we've got, you know, from different backgrounds. But it is something that, you know, you can choose. And I'll give an example for myself personally. When I started with the firm, it was one of the optional questions I could decide how I wanted to self-identify, so that within our systems, then as an individual, then I'm known. And then if there was a program or something that was specific that was helping particular people, whether it's from an ethnic background or otherwise, then I could be identified and I wouldn't miss out on that opportunity. So I think there's, you know, used in the right way, the data can be positive. And I think that more organisations, certainly in the UK, are doing that. And if you look at the work we've done with gender and gender reporting, and I'm sure you'll know from a government perspective, there is work around ethnic minorities and reporting around that. So I think it's something that we do need to look at more carefully.
Yeah. Just to pick on your point actually around being able to select a group you're identified with what's happened recently, the term BAME has become more widely used, but as a term itself, it actually is problematic, and we've kind of touched on this before, where you've described it as it actually hides multitudes of sins, and it actually can hide diversity rather than actually encouraging it. So it just strikes me that we almost have to forge a new type of language. And I mean, Taja, you said at the beginning that you're proud to say that you're Black and to call yourself that. What are your feelings about that term BAME and the problems around it?
I just think that from an institutional point of view, it's quite a lazy way of grouping all ethnicities together, and our struggles might not necessarily be the same between our Asian colleagues and our Black colleagues. When you look at diversity stats, for example, a firm could say, oh yeah, like 17% of our chair board is BAME, but when you really break it down, the stats might be shocking. There might be one Black partner, for example, and the rest might be Asian, and that's not necessarily fair. It's not diverse at all, but you could say it's diverse when you put it under the umbrella of BAME, which I think is really problematic. And it kind of, again, it doesn't help us to identify who we are in the firm, and to really like fall into identity as being a Black colleague in the firm or being an Asian colleague in the firm. I think when you're at work, you want to feel comfortable in your skin. So to be kind of like labelled as just BAME, that's not a representation of who I am. So I think the term is problematic, and I don't think there's anything wrong with saying, I'm Black, or reporting on Black colleagues. I don't think there's anything wrong with saying that.
Yeah, I mean, I love the name of the Embrace sort of society that Gowlings have. I think that's actually a great name for addressing what you're trying to talk about there as well. Bukky, what are your feelings about the use of the word BAME?
I completely agree. It's a lazy form of grouping a set of people together who come from very, very diverse backgrounds. And what I tend to feel is almost as though HR just don't put enough effort into trying to find the very candidates that they should be recruiting. And sort of pushing back to one of your questions earlier in terms of what can HR do, I think we need to look at the people recruiting HR, because those within HR, they come with their own implicit biases and their own blind spots, and they then using what they know and all the issues that they have and the way they perceive certain groups of people to recruit into the firm. They'll recruit people that maybe they know that they both lived in a similar county, or they went to the same university, or their face fits, right? And all those things mean that person, even if they do get the job, their experience throughout the firm is going to be a little bit discolored, because they weren't brought in by someone who was genuinely looking for a diverse candidate who was able to do the job. So I think it's important to look at the people who are recruiting people in. And I've been fortunate enough in some of the roles that I've done that I haven't left it to HR to do the sifting of the CVs, because it starts at that stage when you get the CVs in. I've done that myself because I know what I'm looking for, and I'm trying to ensure that I get not just someone who's diverse and can do the job, but someone who has a very different skill set to myself, because you don't want to recruit everyone who just looks and feels like you. You need quite a diverse background of people. And I think HR also needs to do a lot in terms of, just generally looking for a more diverse pool, going out there and making the concerted effort to say we're going to reach out to organizations. For instance, Orrick work with Rare Recruitment Contextual to source candidates from diverse backgrounds. And I think more firms need to do that. And like we said earlier, time will tell. We'll see if the stats are going to change, if the stats are going to improve. And it's not just the getting people in, it's also the retaining them. Because we've talked before about microaggressions. If you recruit a great person, can you then hold on to them inside the firm by doing what's right by them? Who knows?
Yeah. Do you think there's an issue around also just those job descriptions as well? Because I know if I read some job descriptions, I just think they want a unicorn here. But actually, again, the use of language within job descriptions can potentially be putting people off as well. And again, that's not something which is necessarily monitored or looked at by HR in my experience as well.
Because oftentimes the same job description is regurgitated and used over and over again, and no one has sat down and thought, actually, this element of the job we no longer need, this element is not relevant. Again, it's lazy recruitment, isn't it? It's lazy, means of finding people. We're not putting in the effort to think, if we want to get the best people and want to retain the best people, we have to put our best foot forward. And I think as candidates of colour, or as Black people, we also need to see the recruitment process as a two-way thing. Like, am I the right fit for you? Are you as a firm the right fit for me? And that's important. I don't want people going into a firm and feeling like the firm is doing them a favour. No, you come with qualifications, you come with the ability to do a job, you're looking for a fit. So it's not a one-way process. It's certainly a two-way thing that firms need to recognise, and individuals need to also recognise.
So one question I had, and Bukky, I'll ask you first on this one, is actually to really make sure that this change does happen. Should we be making diversity and inclusion and people's efforts towards it, engaging with it, potentially part of, say, someone's appraisal, as part of actually how they are assessed? Potentially.
I think there's a lot of work to be done on the individual level before we go to the organisational level and start looking at appraisals and holding people to a certain standard. Some people, rightly or wrongly, ignorantly or not, come with biases. They come from backgrounds where they've never seen or worked with a diverse pool of people. And it's difficult for them because then they're thrown in. They might see people that look like them, and they might say certain things that you as a Black person look at them and you say, no, that's wrong. No, that shouldn't sound like that. No, you shouldn't be able to say that. But they don't know these things. So I think those conversations about what's right and what's wrong first need to happen before we can start saying you didn't tick box B6 on the form about, on your appraisal about being fully diverse. But I think that also starts with, I've heard the phrase, it's more important if I say to someone, I see what you mean. Right? So if you say to someone, I see what you mean, I see what point you're making, but actually what's really, really more important is I feel you. I feel your pain. I feel that, I'm sat around this table. I can see there's no diversity. So it's not enough for me as a Black person to say there's no diversity around this table. I need my white colleagues to also sit around the table and say there's no diversity around this table. Where's the inclusivity around this table? So my voice plus their voice is a much louder message than just me constantly talking about something and trying to make it more diverse and more inclusive. It's really about them saying, not only that I see what you mean, but I feel what you mean. I can now feel what it is you've been talking about for so long. And it's going to take time. It's not a one-day conversation. It's not a workshop. It's not an initiative. It's a change in attitude that we all need to have. And as we can see, we're having this conversation because of something huge and enormous that happened that really shouldn't have happened on a human level, that really shouldn't have happened, but it's opened up so many issues that we really all should be talking about, which is great.
Okay, and Taja, is seeing diversity, inclusion and appraisals something you think should happen?
I think doing this, it goes back to what Bukky said earlier about being performative, and I think if you start with monitoring people on appraisals, I think someone said something to me a few weeks ago actually. It said when you're working with smart people, oftentimes the smart person will find a smart way of getting out of the things that they know they should do. So when it's all well and good putting it into these appraisals, but these things can be worked around very easily. So I do agree that it starts with the person, it starts with the individual. You need to change people's minds before you start putting things in place that, things can be worked around quite easily in firms when you know the right people. And I agree with the idea that, our voice, yes, our voices can be strong, but in terms of like within a firm kind of situation, we need allyship and we need someone else to say, this isn't right, and that there is no diversity. So when we have that might be a bit more of a better start than starting with appraisals and official regulation. I don't think that will work. It would be very performative and it would feel very fake, and that's something we want to avoid.
Tunji, do you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree with Bukky and Taja's comments around that. I think it is quite personal. If you really want to start appraising people around D&I specifically, then you have to be very intent based on what you're asking them to do. And that then becomes much more personalized to the area they work in, whether they're a leader, and it's around how over time, because you can't just put a target in and say to a leader, your team's not diverse, change it. And it's not going to solve the problem. It's more about then, how do you look over time through education and understanding? And I think to Bukky's point is people having that awareness and then thinking, okay, I get this, I understand it, I see what you mean now. I want to make that change, because not everybody does. And I think we've got to be very clear about that. And even, going through the whole Black Lives Matter now, I've spoken to, some of my, friends outside of work who are white, who are saying, almost a typical American term, enough already. That it's constantly there. And I'm saying it's not going away this time, because it's not a case of that, right, there's going to be a little bit of noise over this and then it will go away. It needs to stay. Otherwise, it will just go away and then we'll forget about it. And, it'll be Brexit or something else that takes up the agenda. So I think it's important that people understand that this is not a compelling event that's happened. This is something that's been historically there for many hundreds of years, if not centuries, that needs to change. And it's not something that's going to change straight away. So putting some D&I targets, for me, is not going to be the answer. What it requires is a cultural behavioural change and an understanding. And that journey of understanding takes time. It needs to settle with people. People need to process it. They need to go away and think about it, and then think about whether they want to make that change. And there'll be probably many that will think, yeah, I need to make a change, or I've not consciously done that in the past. And allyship is one way, anti-racism is another way, to call it out when you see it rather than know that it's bad but not say anything. But I think it's important that as a firm, any company, then I think it's important that there are D&I targets that the board look at first and foremost. And then from that, over time, once that understanding is better, then it's done. And let's be very honest about this, Victoria. We had some quite interesting reports done maybe 3 or 4 years ago now, which highlighted, the challenge in this country. If you look at the FTSE 100 or even the FTSE 250, the board representation of black people on it is terrible. And here we are, and everybody at the time when the report came out said, this is absolutely terrible, we've got to change it. Fast forward 3 years, 4 years ahead, we are no better off. So even though people have said, yes, we're going to do this and all the things and all the initiatives, it hasn't actually changed the most important factor, which is that there's more representation on board. So I think we've got to really think about what's going to move the needle, what's going to compel people to think we need to change this. And I think that's where, companies need to focus for them individually.
Yeah, we just have to keep talking about it to keep it on there, because I suspect that's what happened, is someone probably scurried away and said, oh, we better look at this, and then something else comes along, like say something like Brexit, which then just actually wipes the board of everything else. I've got one final question, and then we're going to do the questions that have come to us in the Q&A. So my last question is, what's the one thing that you would change to make a difference to diversity and inclusion in professional services? So, Bukky, I'll start with you in that one.
An individual can't really affect that much change in an organisation. So I think it starts with the person. And it's my commitment. What I'm going to do is try and provide more mentorship to other people who want to work within professional services, and ensure that I am the representation they need to see. And when I'm recruiting, I want to ensure that I recruit from a more diverse pool of people. And I'm hoping if everybody took a similar step, then collectively, we would be able to affect change.
Okay. Taja, what's the one thing that you would change?
I completely agree with what Bukky said about, you're only one person, so it does start with smaller steps. So for example, like the mentoring thing. We have placement students in our business development team, and I'm trying to kind of be that mentor face, if you will, kind of taking them under my wing. And so I might not have any impact when it comes to recruitment, but at least they can see what a diverse team would look like. So when they go out to apply for jobs, they know what's right and what's not, if that makes sense. So they can set the standard. And within Embrace, I'm trying to not only look at the bigger action plans, but also the smaller things we can do. So like for Black History Month, making sure that we're, putting on little coffee talks, just being more celebratory about our Black colleagues, being more positive. Because these things that go on, they do take an emotional toll when you're constantly talking about diversity and inclusion. So making sure that we have a chance to celebrate our Black colleagues and celebrate Black history. So just putting on fun things like that, and just making people more aware of diversity and culture within the workplace.
Yeah, love that idea. Tunji?
Yeah, I'll add to Bukky and Taja's comments actually, and one thing I would change is sponsorship actually. So mentorship is important, and that's kind of with the person on the journey, but sponsorship for me is the one thing that I think needs to change in our profession. And that means when people join the firm that they've got that sponsorship to allow them to be successful and hopefully get to the top of that organization. Because without sponsorship, you can have as many coaches and mentors as you like, and you can be the best person you are, but you'll need that in any professional services firm, which certainly is partner-centric. You'll need that sponsorship to get to the top.
Okay, love that. Okay, we've got a few questions in the Q&A. So the first one is from Jill Wan, who is our chair of the London Committee. Thanks, Jill. Her question is, do you find that it is you that has to lead the way, introduce diversity inclusion topics, for example, in chat or over coffee to help make it less awkward, or do others take the leads? Tunji, do you find that's what happens, or is it something that companies are becoming better at?
I think companies are becoming better at it, because I think a lot of, certainly in terms of Black Lives Matter, a lot of Black employees have said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to be the one that has to keep leading on this conversation, because it does affect me and it's something around my lived experience. So I think we've certainly relied not just on Black employees, but also on our allies as well to help with those conversations and discussions. And what we did specifically in our firm at PwC is we actually provided some really good toolkits for anyone to have those conversations within their group, because you could have a group within the firm that is predominantly white who can still have a conversation around Black Lives Matter or around ethnicity. And it's giving them the tools to be able to do that themselves, to have the discussion. So it's a joint effort, but certainly not one where culturally within our firm that we've expected just our Black employees to have to lead it.
Okay. Our next question is, sadly, I think many firms have jumped on diversity in order to be seen to be doing something in this space, but without true belief and passion for change driving it. Any advice for someone working in such firms? Definitely some challenges there. Taja, any thoughts on this?
I think sadly that there'll be a lot of firms that are doing that kind of like performative allyship and sympathy and that. And I think the advice is that if you are passionate about it yourself, I know it kind of goes against what we said about leading the way, but if you even just try and start even a group. I know that at Gowling there were a lot of trainees who've been speaking to, who are kind of like my age and are more aware kind of about what's going on in society, that they bring different ideas, they bring passion, and it's only through kind of talking to them or making those connections where I found that they are passionate about the same things and they're passionate about changing things. So try and make a group, put that on yourself to do that, and then when you've done that, that's kind of your responsibility done, and then other people will lead the way because you're inspiring them, so it won't just be on you. But if you're passionate about it, I think it's something that you kind of have to trigger that movement.
Yeah, I agree. And the last question is, well, it's actually two related questions from Paul. Number one, would you say diverse representation is better or worse within marketing/BD teams? And might marketing/BD have a unique voice in this discussion, being close to clients and markets? Bukky, thoughts on this?
I certainly say it's getting better because there's certainly more awareness and there's more people in marketing because we're making more of an effort to recruit the right people and more diverse base. In terms of sort of from the client perspective, a lot of the pressure is coming from the client side because they're wanting to see more diverse base from us as a firm that's serving them. They're wanting to see, you know, who the women are on our board. They wanted to see who the Black and minority ethnic people are on our board. And that's a fantastic thing to see, but we shouldn't be reactive about this. We should certainly be proactive about wanting to do something about it. So it's not just when a client requests that information that we are then like, oh, look how diverse we are. It should just be by way of what we do. So, I mean, again, it's a time will tell type of thing. You know, who knows what's going to happen. I live in hope because I've been in this industry for 18 odd years. And going from being the only Black person in every space, I'm now starting to see more and more Black people within this space. And I think Black people also need to know that these roles exist and they can apply for these roles. And, you know, that there's a lot that they can do with their skill set within roles like this. So, yeah.
I think that's a great way to end the session. So I want to thank all three of you again for taking the time to talk to us about this. And I think we've had a great discussion. I've certainly written down, I think, about 50 ideas. Before we absolutely finish, just to let you all know that when you leave this webinar, a pop-up link will appear for your feedback. Really grateful if you could complete that. Our next webinar is actually on Thursday, and it's on Beyond Vanity Metrics. It's certainly not too late to register if you'd like to do that, and please do check the PM Forum website for all our other webinars that are coming up. You can also catch up with the webinars on YouTube as well, including this one, if there was anything that you thought, oh, what did they say, want to go back and have a listen to. And finally, it's PM Forum Conference on the 24th of September. It's on marketing matters in the new normal. There's a really fantastic programme. If you haven't, again, registered for that, then please do. There's still plenty of time to book and lots of details on the website as well. So once again, thank you to our panellists and thank you all for joining us. Goodbye.
Thank you.